everyone. I'm so excited to welcome you back for this edition of Temperature Check, and particularly excited to welcome our guest, Joshua Amponsem, who is a Ghanaian climate advocate and the co-director of the Youth Climate Justice Fund. Joshua is focused on supporting grassroots youth-led organizations and on championing youth councils across the global South. He also formerly served as the climate lead for the United Nations Secretary General's Envoy on Youth and is the founder of the Green Africa Youth Organization. Joshua, I also loved your TED Talk where you talked about the inequalities with climate work and how to fix them. And I hope that our viewers will check that out too.
Yes, that'd be amazing. Thanks very much, Nili, for having me here. Yeah, and for the very kind introduction.
It's great to be here with you. So, one of the things that really connects both of us is our passion for the power of young people in driving change. The way that we see it, the future is actually all about young people. And generationally, it's clear that all of the work that we're doing today is really for them and
Yeah.
that they have so much to contribute in building it. And I really appreciate how you've spoken about the importance of youth, especially in the global South and in Africa, in leading the climate transition. So I wanted to kick off by asking you, how do you think about building good leaders for the future? We say that younger generations will lead, but where are we investing in them? And how could we do better in creating the capacity in young people, particularly to contribute their talent towards climate action and solutions?
Thank you very much, Nili. You hit the nail on the head with that one. And I find it interesting when I started my work with youth movement, and I've been working with youth movement and young people for the past 13 years. And particularly in the context of climate and sustainability, in many rooms that I would enter, people would have put so much hope on young people and the next generation and the younger generation, and saying that they're gonna fix it, they're gonna figure it out, they're gonna do it, and they'll become better. But better leadership and good leadership don't fall from the skies. You have to invest in it to make it happen. And that drew, my interest to look at how much investment is actually going to young leaders and youth movements. So at the Youth Climate Justice Fund, we did our study in 2023 that showed that only 0.76% of climate philanthropy was going to young people. Now, that is, of course, 0.76%, of a very small fraction of money that also goes to climate. But the reality of that was that out of that money, a larger percentage of that was going to young leaders in the global north, countries, particularly US and Europe, and groups and organizations and youth movements in the global south at large were really struggling to tap into this resource opportunity. So it made us really think about how do we invest in the young people that we have so much hopes in, that they will be able to, become better leaders and have the right ambition, the right political will, and the right leadership to get out of this mess, but also to create a future that we all want. So we set up the Youth Climate Justice Fund, and our goal was to invest, really particularly focusing on historically underfunded communities and geographies where funding do not reach community-led movements and grassroots organizations who are not just living every day with the complex issues of climate and social inequalities that have existed for many years, but also fundamentally, if you look at the data, these are also the regions where in the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, majority of young people will be in this region. They will be the workforce that will drive every industry. They'll be the workforce that will drive every aspect of society. And Africa is a very good example of that, right? Currently, 70% of its population are youth. Is projected by 20 50 that is going to be higher. And across the world, almost every 9 out of 10 young people will be of an African or Black descent. Well, that is a huge number. And if we do not invest in them at the moment, for them to have the right skills, for them to build the right leadership, but also for really identify the talents within that sort of ecosystem, and help them to really become the leaders we want them to be, we will be doing ourselves a disservice. So I think that is where we are now, currently. And to the part of how do we do this? I think we do this by fundamentally getting rid of the practices that we know do not work. And one of them is tokenistic engagement of young people, particularly in the global south. In many cases, if you see a young leader, and this is not just, of course, with young people, I've seen this also happen with, adults, and I see it everywhere, that global south engagement can be very extractive, and can be very condescending. And in many ways, do not is not approached with a curiosity of wanting to build trust, and wanting to respect the value of the leadership of Global South movement. And I think that is where we start from. And so how do we invest in that? How do we support and engage with mutual respect for the knowledge, for the intelligence, and for the wisdom that people who are actually know their community, understand their culture, understand what impact mean for their region. How do we really respect their perspective and be able to trust resources in their hands, but also be able to lend our access to other opportunities um, to them so that they can tap into that? And how do we learn from the way they do things? And that is where I think we really need to do a lot of work on.
The demographics that you shared are unequivocal. This is really about moving to where the economy is going, moving to where the people are and increasingly will be. I also love how you talk about engaging with curiosity and respect. One of the things that I think is really brilliant about working with young people is that you can tell that they're not held back by ideas of what might not work because they haven't been at it for as long as, say, older leaders, even like myself, although I don't like to call myself an old leader. They think more ambitiously because they don't have that cap of historical bias. Um, and so one thing that I've thought a lot about is how we can create more spaces to be able to actively listen to young people's ideas in a way that could impact our collective action. And within this, I'd also love to ask you a stretch question, which is how might other leaders, those who aren't as young, be able to tap into the creative energy that we once had?
I mean, thanks, Nili. And the sweet spot for the change that we are looking for in the world we live in today is the ability to tap into the wisdom of the past, and be ambitious with the energy and the drive for what we want for the future. To be able to do that, we need a very strong intergenerational collaboration that happens with mutual respect. And I will keep emphasizing on mutual respect. And the reason for that is that for the young to appreciate the struggles, the fights, the effort that have gone to create the spaces that they benefit from today, they will need to really have respect for that incredible work that have been done in the past. And I see this everywhere that, in some cases it's very difficult because young people, and youth movements sometimes wake up to this reality of the social inequality that exists today, and they think and they honestly feel that they've been betrayed or the world has failed them. And it makes it difficult for them to build trust with older generations in some context. In the same way, older generations are also struggling to build trust with young people, and that is for several factors. In many cases, it's like, but they want everything to happen today. They want everything to happen now. They do not have patience, and they're going to come and they're going to scream on the top of their voice. They're going to demand for this. And they do not understand how complex it is to have this governance system that allow us to even make decisions. So there is, of course, there is truth in how each of these generations feel about where we are now. And people ask me, where is the youth movement? Why are they not out in the street campaigning against this or against that? Like they did in 2019 or in 2020, pre-pandemic. The challenge is, movements come and go, but we are living in a world where more and more things are getting intersectional. And the more they get intersectional, the more you have multiple issues. So you cannot singularly pick one thing and make it the enemy, or one thing and make it a silver bullet. We need to talk about multiple issues, and we need to really have a great sense of understanding on how climate impacts, of course, food, and how that impacts well-being, and how that impacts, human rights issues, and economics for people and their livelihood. And all these are really complex. So there is appreciation for that. But I think that where we need to start from is, how do we have the patience and the appetite to go to the other generation and ask, how did it look like 30 years ago when the conversation started on a particular issue? Right? And for the older generation to go to young people and say, to be able to go to a young person and say, right, this is what I know from the past, and this is what I see you trying to achieve. How can my experience from the past help you to achieve what you want to get to? Right? We don't need to repeat mistakes that have been done in the past. We don't need to, by pointing fingers and blaming different generations doesn't necessarily get us anywhere. I think creating a safe space where there is really a lot of respect for the effort and the work that have been done is what is really going to make sure that this is progressive as much as possible. And I'll give a couple of examples that demonstrates this. Well, when I started my work in climate about 15 years ago, even in the United Nations um, ecosystem, it wasn't very common to have young people really present. You would have a youth speaker. You could have a child, a young person as a representative voice speaking. And that was already something that was really sort of amazing and applauded. Um, and the question was, how one person cannot speak on behalf of course, the diversity of young people that are out there, because it's not a homogeneous group, right? You have children, you have adolescents, you have students, you have early career, you have young professionals, and all these are people of different needs and values, and they would say different things. And from that time till, now, where you have every major UN event, there's a lot of youth engagement that happens, which of course is still not perfect, but it has changed a lot from 15 years ago, where you have one representative to now having the table is there, the seat is given, and there's opportunity, for a lot of people to walk through that door and to have a seat there. But then there's other challenges that are being faced with the movement, right? Who represent, how do they consult, how do they have the resources to be there? Who is covering for their safety and well-being? Are they sleeping in a good place? Do they have the briefing packages for the conversation? Do they have a team to support them in preparing for this meeting? There are a lot of things that are still need to be done, but we need to still appreciate the progress we've made from the past while we work on the new things that we want. And I think that is the same, when I think of intergenerational collaboration. How do we really value the past, take wisdom from that, and tap into the ambition, the drive, the energy for the future that we want, and work together to get there.
Thank you. It's encouraging to hear from your experience, the trajectory that we've been on, right? Where there has been progress towards more youth representation and greater intergenerational collaboration. It gives us the hope that this positive trend can continue. And we talked also both about how established leaders can benefit from collaboration with youth,
Mhm. Mhm.
but also how youth can benefit from
Yeah.
learning from the wisdom of established leaders. I mean, it's sometimes when we think about that historical knowledge, we think of the education system itself. And so I wanted to talk with you a little bit about education within this. Another thing that you and I have talked about when it comes to education is the difference between getting out of school with knowledge and getting out of school with skills, right? And then if
Exactly.
you're coming out of school with skills, are they really the skills for the future?
Hmm. Hmm.
Are we really training leaders for the world that is to come? Then another piece, I think, on the education front is ties back to what you're discussing on interconnectivity. There's a lot of room for connection between academia, universities, and the broader world. That's a big core of our practice at Carbon Direct,
Hmm.
is through our science team and team of leaders bringing academic expertise into the real world, kind of out of the university. So academia supports business innovation. There's so much more room for academic research feeding into things like policy making. You've highlighted these gaps in your leadership as well, especially when it comes to this bigger picture of how we're preparing young people for the future. So I'd love to get your take on how we can better connect these fields and ensuring that young leaders are prepared for the future, especially with the right skills for the climate challenges that we have ahead of us.
Yes, I laid out a couple of things in my TED Talk on academia, science, research, and skills, and what and how this is really going to be the pivot on how we build a workforce that can make the green and the just transition possible. Fundamentally, there's a research that came out recently at the end of last year that showed that 70% of all academic programs in universities are designed to support the fossil fuel industry, right? And it's not being designed necessarily for frontier and new ways of, doing business, new ways of production, or new ways that really support that sustainable, low carbon, and resilient future that we need for our world. So that means that our people and our biggest resource that we have in this world, which is our human resource, are not being developed to be able to do the most important thing that we want to do, right? Which is, keeping this planet habitable for us and keeping ecosystem safe, and being able to protect people and ensure that there's human security, in the context of climate. So that is where we are now, and that is the reality that we are facing. I think that we can close that gap by starting with understanding where the inequalities are and how to close those inequalities, close the gap. And climate specifically is a very good one to use as an example. So, between 1990 to the year 2020, 78% of all, no, actually 90% of all the most cited climate research papers were authored in global North institutions. Now, fundamentally, a lot of these research were also done in the global South, but the lead authors were global North authors, right? And that is where you see again one big inequality that exists. Specifically for Africa, for instance, 78% of all their climate research funding dedicated for the continent were sitting in global North institutions, and having them, have the resources and lead the way, as opposed to having those on the ground, their, academic institutions and research institutions in these regions actually have the leadership of that work. That is not happening. If you look across, most, of course, emerging markets and developing countries, the academic sector as a whole is not designed to have the right laboratories, the right equipment, and the right tools for students to be able to take advantage of it, to do the research that they need, to provide the right sort of solutions or innovation for the industries within their countries. Unless, of course, they have to travel and go abroad, and sometimes they break through. These are the fundamental issues that we have. So if we think of course, the three biggest biomes in the world that is keeping all of us alive, right? They're in global south countries. If we think of where our biggest youth population are, they're in global south countries. If we do not really look back into the academic system within these places and ensure that the equipments are there, the tools are there, the laboratories are there, the innovation is able to be developed and thrive, the research is able to happen, but also put trust in the research that come out of these places, which of course is linked to the fact that there's not enough sort of resources for them to do the research in the first place. But the more we can boost that confidence and allow really young people and the institutions in these places to take back the leadership on this work, we are always going to have this gap in solutions being developed in one part of the world, trying to make it fit in another part of the world. Whereas there is not a true intentional, well-developed leadership and investment into that leadership locally, in terms of the knowledge and intellectual infrastructure for these places. This is one big gap that I'm currently seeing, and I think that we are not going to make the progress we need as long as this gap exists. So what do we need to do? We need to think about academic reformations. We need to think about who hosts research funding and research investments. We need to think about institutional capacity across Global South, and we need to think about where do we need to make the right what is the right pivot where the investment make the most sense? Is it at high school? Is it at universities? Is it in vocational and applied, innovation and science institutions across the world? Because this is really what is going to make the transition happen much faster. And a good example is to think about how we fundamentally know that sub-Saharan Africa has, one of the biggest solar potential in the world, but it's also at the same time the region the most energy poverty, right? So we have a solution. We know where the solution is needed, but we have a gap. And the gap is not just the funding. The gap is also, it's not a region that is necessarily producing its own panels. It's not a region that is necessarily adding value to lithium to produce lithium batteries. It's just an extractive system that takes so much out of the region without the right research, the right innovation that can allow for that research innovation to happen locally to solve the problem that the continent faces the most. So this is, really to show that you can have a solution and you can know where the solution is fitting, but you're not going to solve the problem per se just because you have a solution. The solution can exist and renewables and solar particularly have existed for a long time now. And the region is, of course, slowly onboarding. But given that is the most energy poor region of the world, it could have been much faster if there was the right support for research innovation locally that allow for value add, whether to sustainable mining of the natural resources, lithium, nickel that we know the region have, cobalt, and ensure that that can be done. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a really interesting line of inquiry, the focus on education and academic systems, because it's just one example of where you can look at one system and identify a whole series of causes and effects
Yeah.
that are interconnected. And then I love how you also always point to solutions. You always say, and what I think we could do about this is, and then you can see also an interconnected series of solutions and outcomes that
Yeah.
really would address a broad array of opportunities and needs. You and I have also spoken about interconnectivity within the climate field,
Mhm.
and really needing to become more aware of the climate challenge as a system of connected needs. So you've spoken, for example, about how food systems are relevant and impacting energy systems. Food and energy both significantly affect communities. And then we also see within the climate community that often people pursue though niche topics. We're kind of siloed because the system is best at recognizing and rewarding specialized fields. And so I wonder if you have further thoughts on how we could nurture a system that really rewards intersectional leaders and how our current institutions can find ways to support that kind of leadership, to see it and really support it.
No, this is so important. And my how I saw this more vividly was how it happens in philanthropy. So, as a grassroots organizer, and this was over a decade ago, one of the issues that I saw that was so just visible with every community growing up in Ghana was waste management. And, trying to talk to institutions on how to get resources to work with communities to deal with waste management. And immediately it was just difficult to do that because you talk to a funder who works on climate and they will say, well, it's waste management. So I think you should talk to environmental funders. And then it's like, okay, so there's climate and then there's environment. Oh, well, okay. So you go to the environmental funder and you say, no, there's this issue on this, and it's really, impacting communities. Of course, it leads to a lot of sanitation and health issues, and people are getting sick. It's not good for the oceans and all of that. And they tell you, well, that is great, but I think you should talk to a health funder or an oceans funder because this is really the sweet spot for them. Of course, you go to the oceans fund and they tell you, well, this is not really an oceans problem. I think it's more, issues with health, and you should talk to a health funder. A health funder points you somewhere else. Everyone keep moving you around because you're dealing with an issue that is very intersectional in nature. Of course, if you have waste management issues, you have health issues, right? You have health issues, you have, of course, well-being issues and productivity issues, particularly with children, with women who fall sick. If the health infrastructure is not good, of course, this leads to a lot of discrimination, eventually, all sort of issues that come out of that. So, of course, each of these funders have a responsibility to play, but yet it's like they are trying to find the one thing that is only specific to what they do to be able to release resources to be able to do that. And that is where I realized that, philanthropy had been designed to have this strict definition of issues in our world that doesn't allow them to fund and be able to fund to multi-solve and to deal with underlying issues that in many cases really are the fundamental ways that you can change things within a system. And I think it hasn't been rewarding to intersectional leaders because the practice is that if you're an expert on a specific issue, that is how you get funding because then you are seen as the wisdom and you have so much expertise on, I don't know, rural health, infrastructure, so you get resources for that. But then someone with the rural health infrastructure, wisdom and expertise and academic background might have actually also lived through a major conflict, within their community and have to negotiate peace with rebels and whatever. And that automatically, out of that experience, give them a lot of wisdom to share about, how do you, build infrastructure and how do you develop in times of conflict. But if they start talking so much about that, then okay, so what do you really focus on? Are you a peace and conflict person, or are you a health person? What is your expertise? And then it start getting murky from there on. And I think this is a challenge that I've seen. And when we started the Youth Climate Justice Fund, our goal was simple. Communities on the ground are struggling to fundraise because they struggle to communicate from the silver bullet perspective and from singular approaches. They are very plural in the way, in the way they think, very plural in the way we perceive issues and the way we think we're going to solve issues. And that makes it difficult to get, support and investment. And we took on the challenge of saying that we're going to work, with a philanthropic community, and we're only going to accept unrestricted funding because that is how we can actually support groups to do what they want to do and to allow them to use whatever framing, whatever terminology, and whatever thing they approach that really they believe in. Of course, that didn't make it very easy for us, but one thing that has been clear to us is that philanthropy can be adaptive, right? Investments can be adaptive. And we took on the journey of really working with some philanthropic actors and being consistent on our advocacy that until funding is being moved in a flexible, adaptive, intersectional way, the changes we see are going to be short-term changes. They're not going to be durable in nature because, of course, you can fund a huge, infrastructure on energy, but if you have a weak democracy and you have a change of government and people cannot really push back on what they need and what they want to fight for, all that progress you've had in 2 or 3 years can completely be eliminated, right? You can fight really and invest very strongly on ocean preservation if you do not care about waste management and sanitation, and again, the place that you are protecting, a marine protected area, could stand at a strong risk because a bunch of trash is being dumped into it. And the same with energy. You can really advance energy infrastructure, really fund an energy project. But if local communities are not really part of it, and if it doesn't address some of the sort of root causes that they face within their communities, they could even push back against such solutions. And I think this is what we really very much proud to be able to do, because we started on this journey and we thought it's going to be super difficult to do this. But within 2 years, we've been able to move close to 10 million USD to different groups around the world, to be able to do work intersectionally with flexible funding that is not tied or defined specifically to any of these buckets of thinking, but groups can be highly intersectional in the way they approach issues. And I think we need to create more room and more space for that to happen.
This is a really practical example of how a lack of intersectional thinking can really impact outcomes on the ground in the choices that communities make, the choices that leaders make, missing opportunities, and things like this. I see myself, hopefully, I really do, as an intersectional leader, cutting across many key themes. And this is also very much how we work at Carbon Direct. We always say the company was founded with a focus on interdisciplinary efforts. Some things that I think about are how two things. One, how do you pair people who are kind of can be broad and work across topics with experts who can be deep? So you're kind of doing both at the same time. Then the other thing is how do you train experts from different fields to collaborate and work with each other? So a lot of it is also in kind of leadership and team building, and then in how organizations work across and with each other. But the ability to be flexible in doing that when we are facing a time of so much change requires nimbleness that you bring up
Hmm.
is also super important.
Yeah.
While I have this time with you, I would not want to miss the opportunity to talk with you more specifically about Africa,
Mhm.
an area, well, you're from, you're African, and you're also a great thought leader on the continent and its future. One thing that really gets to me is people talk about Africa like it's one big unit, like it's kind of this monolithic place when it's huge, it's vast. Africa has 54 countries. And then in each country, you have so many different
Yeah.
cultures, political economies,
Yeah.
different types of natural resources and natural environments. Um, and so I always feel like one of the keys to really unlocking new opportunities in Africa would be understanding and engaging with more local solutions and communities. And I wonder how you see it. Do you see the same thing missing in the designs of initiatives that meet the unique needs of different communities? And do you also see that there would be opportunities for local communities to play a bigger role in shaping solutions that make sense for them?
I mean, absolutely on the latter part of the question on, local communities leading their own solutions. I think this is fundamental, and then one will think this is obvious and should be the standard practice, but unfortunately, it is not. Now, there are several reasons for that, and one of them is just the lack of trust. There is just a huge trust gap between, implementers and development organizations and those who actually seek to do good. and the ability to trust local leaders and communities in what really they think is important to them. And I think that is continuously creating and widening the inequality gap, right? As we see it. Um, a good way to describe this is if you look into the practice of even salaries. You know, for people who work in sometimes the same international organization, look at the salary scales between how much they want to pay their employees based on the continent. And of course, and like you said, sometimes bundling the continent into one and saying, okay, we're going to pay this rate over there. But of course, the cost of living in Nairobi is very different from the cost of living, in Cape Town, and that is also different from the cost of living, in Freetown. So it's really diverse in that sense. The second part of it is the idea that, organizations think that they know what the solution could be or should be, and going into communities and literally telling them about this solution and wanting to work with them on the solution, as opposed to really going with curiosity to find out what are you working on, what would be the best way for you to address this issue, and how can we support you to do that. I think that piece is very much missing, and in many cases, I've seen over the years, is most solutions are pre-designed before they even arrive in communities. And consultations and fact-finding missions and the learning journeys that they do, a lot of it is to socialize the idea with the community as opposed to actually going with curiosity and asking, how can we help and how can we support and how do we bring the resources we have to support something that you fundamentally believe in. So I think that is, it's colonial in many ways, but it still happens today, and it shouldn't be the way to go. The second thing is the way partnership is approached. So the practices that sometimes is being portrayed as, oh, there's a good partnership here. We have a direct partnership with institution A or B in the region, and we are working with them directly, and they are the local partners, and they are doing everything. So we stay in the background and all of that, and it's painted as really good. The challenge is that while that is true in principle, that is such partnership, in many cases, the resources are not hosted with the local partner, right? And that is the example I gave within academia, for example. So a lot of this research happening on climate and climate impacts on the continent is being done in partnership with local institutions, except that they don't have the money. The money is still being held somewhere else. Their authorship, who is actually owning the knowledge, is the credit is not given to who credit is due. So you can think of it as, if someone goes to an indigenous community and talk to indigenous leaders and gather a lot of wisdom, and now, author a paper and they put their name on it, of course, they become the bearer of that wisdom, of that knowledge, as opposed to the actual people who have been living with this the whole time. Now, of course, if that paper or that report leads somewhere else, whoever authored that is the person who is constantly being engaged, being paid, being resourced to keep doing that work, not the local community who actually provided the basic knowledge for that thing to happen. So this is the reality of the world we live in, and it's overlooked in many ways. But I think we have to really think about how do we course correct, and how do we really give credit where credit is due? How do we give resources to who resources really should be with? And how do we fundamentally accept who are the true leaders of the solutions that are being frontiered today, and where investments are going into? So I think, yes, the continent is super diverse in many ways, with natural resources, with, innovation, with, political economies, and a bunch of other things. There's a high level of diversity. At the same time, there's high level of opportunity in different regions, and there's diversity in that too. One thing that cuts across the entire sub-Saharan Africa is the fact that our leadership is still being undermined, and that has to change. And I think that this is something worth really thinking about. In addition to how do we approach the continent with curiosity to learn, as opposed to with the interest to implement whatever organizations have already pre-cooked in their boardrooms and ready to implement because it's a good idea.
Mm, there's so much that you've said there. that's powerful, and topics like the undermining of leadership, the inequitable distribution of credit and acknowledgement for wisdom, work, they're really important to set apart and listen to. I also hear some connections between what you're saying here and the conversation that we were having earlier on youth,
Yeah.
where you're bringing up again these topics of approaching with curiosity,
Mhm.
of really listening. Um, and so I wonder if when you think across examples in sub-Saharan Africa, you think across examples working with youth groups and intergenerationally, are there any specific examples of these types of models that are actually working and creating impact today?
Yes, no, there are a number of them, and I'm going to share a few that sit on top of my mind. One of the things that we did, particularly on waste management, because that's where I started the story on intersectionality and different generations. But on waste management, for instance, a part of the youth movement really saw that the municipalities keep contracting formal waste management companies and industries to manage waste in cities. Now, while this is, the fashion of doing it and everyone does it, the movement realized that there is a whole community of informal waste workers who do an incredible work of collecting waste within certain part of the city, but yet they are never contracted. They are never included in any strategy development for the city. It's
Mhm.
almost like they don't exist, even though they are there every day and they are doing this work. And they work closely with the municipality on how do you actually acknowledge, even though it's an informal sector, how do you acknowledge the role they play within our cities? And how do you bring them on board into your structures to really create some sort of a zero waste and highly sort of a circular economy model? Because as a city, this is the goal, but you cannot achieve that goal if you keep working with only the formal companies. And this was for me a very highly intergenerational partnership between a youth movement and government entity to come together and say, yeah, we see a lot of wisdom in what you're sharing, but how do we do it, given the fact that as a municipality, we are constantly overwhelmed, we have a lot on our plate,
Mhm.
and we cannot do more than what we're already doing. And giving trust to the youth movement to be able to organize the informal workers, bring them, create a forum, bring all the different formal companies, regulatory bodies to create a zero waste strategy. And the first was in the city of Accra with the Green Africa Youth Organization, working with the municipality to create this zero waste strategy for the city, and really working eventually carving out of the waste management issue to even tackling broader methane production for the city and thinking about how do you reduce methane by diverting waste from landfill sites, and reducing the organic content within waste.
Mhm.
But this was a true partnership between a true intergenerational partnership that was intersectional, started on climate, became about dignity for informal waste pickers who are mostly women who are working on the streets, and then becoming a methane issue for a municipality, and then winning the Earthshot Prize at the end of last year. So when I think of examples like this, is really beautiful. Another example is the Youth Climate Councils in Sierra Leone, in Freetown. The Youth Climate Councils working with the mayor of Accra to really do broader consultations on issues around heat and heat within urban cities, and how do we create shade in cities so that people who sell on the street, people who are street vendors or sell on open markets, can get a green corridor within the city where they can take refuge during certain moments. And of course, it's easier for the youth movement to know this because, young people spend a lot of time outdoors, in many cases in our part of the world. And of course, during extreme heat seasons, it's very unbearable, right? But also they spend a lot of time, with their mothers who are sitting on open markets trying to sell food and vegetable. Their parents spending time with their fathers who are carpenters and up in the open air, chopping wood and carving different products. And they see that something needs to be done about this. And how do we work with the city and the city officials to do something on this? This is the examples of how you can really have different generations tap into each other's strength and working together to really solve issues that concerns everybody, right? And I have multiple examples in Mozambique during Cyclone Idai, in Accra during massive floods, where young people have worked with the National Disaster Management Organization to use cell phones and USSD, which is a way of messaging, to send early warning messages to people in communities to warn them of an incoming extreme weather event. These are partnerships that are highly respectful. There's mutual respect and mutual value, and really helps communities as a whole. Yeah.
I love these examples and thank you for bringing them. I love them because I can sit and picture
Mhm, mhm.
Accra, and it really brings it to life. And, I think examples of what's working really motivate us. We want to drive and see more of it. So thank you for bringing those. As we wrap up our time, I wanted to end with a fun question. So this is a popular one here on Temperature Check. We call it the magic wand question.
Right.
So we're getting very creative now. You're going to put on your young hat to bring forward creativity.
Mhm.
Um, if you had a magic wand and only one chance to use it, what would you do?
Oof. Oh man. So that's a tough one. I'm trying to think of what would I do that will have the biggest sort of influence and impact. Um, Whew, yeah, so many different things I want to do. But what I would do with my if I had that one chance magic wand, yeah, would be really something that I think we've lost a lot of empathy in this world.
Mhm.
And if I had that one thing, I think if everyone could have empathy and understand the context of different people in different parts of the world, that is going to get us to make decisions much quicker, much faster, much better, and much durable. It's one thing that, I know it's not a grand thing, like, but I feel like it's the substance of life, to be able to have empathy and to be able to understand what someone else is going through and appreciate it. And it's not, we sympathize a lot in this world, but I think we're really losing a lot on empathy. And if we could do that, it could really help us in making some of the biggest decisions that is ahead of us, and get buy-in pretty easier. So that is it. Yeah.
Well, I actually think that is a grand thing. Because when I think about some of my magic wand ideas, with many of which are related to finance and economics, I think that if your magic wand action on empathy would cause a lot of those other things to happen naturally. So thank you so much for
Thank
being
you, Nili.
here. Thank you for this wonderful conversation, and especially thank you for all that you're leading every day.
Thank you. Thank you for creating the space to have difficult conversations. Of course,
Hmm.
it can be very uncomfortable talking about some of these systemic inequalities that have been there for many years, and we've normalized them. So yeah, thank you for creating that and for asking the right questions. And yeah, looking forward to hoping that people who listen get influenced by this and can be a better version of themselves.
I'm looking forward to continuing our conversations along the way, but even more so to the actions.
Yes, yes, definitely. That's the most important part.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.